Hi, welcome back. So today I'm making an optional lesson about becoming a studio art professor. So first things first, if you would like to be a studio art professor in the United States, you need an MFA degree, which stands for Master of Fine Arts. Now, if you want to be an art history professor, then you need a PhD. The reason that you don't need a PhD to be a studio art professor is that the degree does not exist in the United States, and so Master of Fine Arts is the terminal degree. It's the highest degree that you can get as a painter or sculptor or designer. Okay, so let's talk about these different positions you might hold when becoming an art professor. So usually, because um, a person can often make more money being an art professor than being an artist who is just a freelancer. Um, you have to become an adjunct for a few years, and this is not the case in every field. So, for instance, if you got your PhD in economics, you could probably become a full-time professor right away because not as many people want to be full-time professors in economics because you can make more money like working on Wall Street or like becoming an economist than you could being a professor. And so there's a lot less competition, but there's a lot more competition to be an art professor. And so most people start off being an adjunct for a couple of years. And if you don't have to do that, if you can go into getting a full-time job right away, that would be great. And a way to possibly do that would be to get your MFA at a state school. State schools often have free MFA programs, but they require you to teach for a couple of years. And so you end up usually going for 3 years full time instead of 2 years full time because you're also teaching to make your degree free. But that also gives you the opportunity to get a few courses taught before you finish with your MFA. So that way you can say, look, I taught these courses, I already have experience, and I'm ready to go full time. Okay, but most of the time you would start off as an adjunct, and there are some issues around being an adjunct. One is that you're only paid per course. So, for example, you might make like $2,500 per course, or if it's a school that's a little bit more isolated and they have trouble attracting adjuncts, they might pay something like $6,000 a course. Some places pay as low as like 1,500 a course, which is really terrible. And you also don't get health insurance unless maybe you work at a state school and you work half time. So if you teach 2 classes per semester, that would be considered half time. So when I taught at University of Maryland, because it was a governmental institution, anyone who worked half time would get health insurance, if you work at least 50%. And so since I taught 2 courses, I got health insurance there. But that's not the case if I just taught 1 class there, 1 class at a different university, 1 class at a different university. I had to buy my own. Okay, back when I was an adjunct. So it can be really hard for a few years to be an adjunct. When I was adjuncting, I had other part-time jobs as well to make ends meet, and I still, got pretty far behind on payments because it just pays so poorly, and it's not really a fair thing that this is the case with the system, but that is the way it is. And so I did it because I wanted to, break into the field of teaching. And so once you get a full-time job, there are a couple different possible, there are 2 different ways you could start. You could either start as an instructor, which doesn't require you to have to do a lot of other things um, like have advisees and work on committee meetings, but it pays a lot less. Or you could become an assistant professor. So this is usually the entry-level position. And so you become an assistant professor, and you can either be an assistant professor that is tenure track or non-tenure track. If you're non-tenure track, then you will not have the opportunity to advance into the next level. You're just going to stay an assistant professor, forever. But if you are a tenure track assistant professor, that means that you have 5 years to be a professor before you can apply, an assistant professor, before you can apply to be promoted to associate professor. That's the next level, all right? And generally people, when they apply to become an associate professor, they also apply for tenure at the same time. And if you have tenure, it means you can't be dismissed for like any reason. I mean, like any, before that, you can be dismissed for any kind of reason at all. Once you become an associate professor, you have a little bit more security there. They'll still fire you if you do something like very morally wrong or if your department gets downsized. But for the most part, you have a lot more job security once you are a tenured associate professor. And then the next step above that, you have to wait another 5 years. So I should have said you wait 5 years, then you apply for the promotion, and then it's a whole year of waiting to find out. The committees review your application and then let you know. And I'll talk more about that application process in a minute. So we talked about you start as an assistant professor, and then you become an associate professor, hopefully with tenure. After that, you can 5 years later, you can apply again, and then in the 6th year, become a full professor or just a professor without the word in front of it. And that's the next step up. And then the only step above being a full professor is a professor emeritus. But that's usually just an honor, because generally a person who is a professor emeritus is retired. So it's just like an honorary name. And so most of your professors are either going to be adjuncts, assistant professors, associate professors, or full professors. And with each promotion, you get a raise in salary. Every other year besides that, you just get a cost of living raise or no raise at all. Okay, so when I was talking about applying to become the next level of professor, the way you do that is to create a dossier. And a dossier is a batch of documents and essays and narratives that explain why, like what you've done over the 5 years and why you feel that you should be promoted. And so there are 3 things that professors have to do in order to be professors. One of them is the one that you guys are probably most familiar with, is our teaching. So professors have to teach and of course also advise. The other thing we have to do is we have to do committee work. So I'm on a couple of committees. I'm on the Women and Gender Studies Committee, and I'm on another committee. And I have to attend the United Faculty Assembly meetings. Okay, so that's the second thing that we do. The third thing that we do is scholarship. So you've heard this phrase probably, publish or perish. That means in most fields, if a person doesn't publish their research, if the person doesn't do independent research and get publications or publish in articles in scholarly publications or publish books, then you perish. You don't get promoted. You get you don't make it. But in our field, because we are studio artists, our version of scholarship is not research. It is producing artwork and having exhibitions. So it's a little bit different for us. And the nice thing about that is it's like what we wanted to be doing anyway, outside of being a professor. And so being a professor is actually an excellent job for a full-time artist, because part of your job is to make work and get exhibitions, and that's part of what you want to do anyway. And you're being a professor partly because you enjoy teaching, but partly because you want to support yourself as an artist. And so it's a really nice mutually beneficial 2 careers to put together. So you put together a dossier that used to be huge stacks of paper like this, but now it's all electronic, that explains the ways in which you were a good colleague on committees, the way that you helped students, and the way that you've run your courses, and also what you've done in terms of your scholarship. Okay. When you're applying for your first position, they will ask you for a lot of documents. And so if you're applying to be an adjunct, you probably won't have to submit quite as many things. But there's quite a hardcore application process to become a full-time professor. You'll be asked for your cover letter, your CV. Remember we talked about the difference between a resume and a CV early in the semester. The CV is many pages long and lists everything you've done professionally. Okay, so your cover letter, your CV, your teaching philosophy, which is a page or 2 document talking about what your philosophy of being a teacher, like what you value, how you go about running your classes, that kind of thing. They'll also ask you for an artist statement. They will ask you for a about 20 images of your work, of your artwork. They'll ask you for about 20 images of your students' artwork, and so it can also be, you do need to teach a class or two before you, or more, before you apply for a full-time job so that you have student work to show. You also will be asked sometimes for a statement of diversity, which talks about the way that you make sure that everybody in your classroom is kind of treated equally, but also ways that you incorporate kind of diverse role models in your lesson plans. And you may also be asked for other documents. You'll be asked for your transcripts, so if your undergraduate degree transcript, your MFA transcript, and you'll be asked for either letters of recommendation or just a list of 3 recommenders. And remember, whenever you ask somebody for a letter of recommendation or ask them to recommend you, even if it's just a phone call, like receiving a phone call from the school where you're applying, you definitely want to send thank you cards to those people. So those are all the things that you will send in this huge, massive packet. Usually they ask for everything to be in one PDF, or they'll have a website where you can upload each document separately. Once that is done, you wait a few months, and then you hear back from the committee, and they'll either say that you are not, you didn't move on to the next phase, or they will invite you generally for a phone interview, and then you will be interviewed by the hiring committee. And so I've been the chair of a hiring committee here at the university. And what we do is we take all this information, we use a rubric, we decide who to interview, we talk to the people on the phone, we give them exactly the same amount of time each, we ask them the same number of questions each, generally about half an hour long, and you will be talking to everybody on the committee. If you make it past that, then you'll be invited to campus. They'll pay for your flight, they'll pay for your hotel. Once you arrive there, you will have to do a teaching demonstration. So you'll do a pretend like you're teaching a class to the committee. You'll also meet with the provost, who is the head of all faculty. Sometimes you meet with the president, but generally not. You usually meet with the chair of the department. You interview again with the committee. You have lunch with the committee normally. And sometimes they'll ask you to give a lecture about your own work in front of any students who want to see it, and the committee and the provost and everybody. They'll all be at your lecture, and you'll be giving an artist talk. Okay. Generally, when you apply for a full-time teaching job, you end up moving to a different part of the country for it. So you can have some control by only applying in certain regions, but it's very hard to stay in the same city where you currently live. I mean, it happens occasionally, but like for instance, I'm not from Pittsburgh. I moved here for this position. Okay. What else? So the application process is pretty arduous, and the process of going up for promotion with each step is pretty arduous as well. But it's a really amazing job to have because of the reason I described. Not just that actually making artwork is part of your job. And exhibiting is part of your job, but also because it's really rewarding. It's great to work with people. There is something that you should be aware of, though. I think this job is going to become a little bit more competitive to get in the future because in 2008, there was a big recession in the United States. It was fairly quick. It was like a big collapse. A bunch of banks failed, and the stock markets plummeted. So in 2008, a lot fewer people had children, and in the years then probably would have otherwise, and in the years after that, it was similar until the economy picked back up. And so in 2023, which will be 18 years after 2008, there will be an enrollment crisis across the United States because lots of people who otherwise would have enrolled in college that year would have not been born. If that makes sense. And so in 2023, programs will probably shrink because there won't be as many students entering the university. And so if you're thinking about going into this field, you might want to teach an adjunct class like 1 per semester or like 2 per semester while you have something else happening at the same time while you're working other jobs, because it is hard to get by as an adjunct. And I think in the coming years there will be kind of fewer positions. But after that, give it a few years past that, and then enrollment will start to tick up again, and it will go back to normal, hopefully. So if you have any questions about what it's like to be an art professor, please put them in the updates page. Thank you. And this is the last lecture of the course. I look forward to receiving your portfolios, and if you're able, please send me rough drafts ahead of time. And I thank you.